Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Master Classes with Coach Mel. Today, we're going to be talking about compression. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about compressor controls. We're going to talk about the four main types of compression or compressors. We're going to talk about sidechain compression, gate, and parallel compression today. I think this will be a really great stream. This was something that I really struggled with when I first started doing audio production, and hopefully today we can answer some questions that have been troubling you as well. If you're watching live on stream, feel free to use the stream chat to converse with me live, and if you're watching on YouTube, then feel free to leave a comment if there's anything that I have not gone over that you are still wondering about. So, what is compression? Compression is taking the loudest part of a signal and the quietest part of a signal and reducing the distance between those things. Say for a vocalist, in the chorus, they're singing a lot louder than in the verses, which is a very common thing because there's the most energy in the choruses. And you want to reduce the distance between these two. Well, compression is one of the best ways of going about that. There are two types of compression. There's upwards compression and downwards compression. Downwards compression is what we typically use. It's the process of assigning a threshold in dBs, and anytime the signal gets too loud, the compressor automatically reduces the amount of dBs that it is outputting, while leaving everything below the threshold intact. Upwards compression does the opposite. Everything below the threshold in dB is increased, leaving everything in the loud section of your signal untouched. Downwards compression is what we typically use. It's the thing that was most easily manufactured when we only had hardware outboard gear. But with digital, now upwards compression is possible. There's also ways of achieving upwards compression with downwards compression using parallel compression, which is what we're going to get into later. But for right now, let's talk about the compressor controls. The controls you see on screen right now are what most compressors have. Some compressors have less, some compressors have more. But these are what you typically want to look for when you are faced with a new compressor and want to know where these things are. So, number one is ratio, how much compression is applied. The ratio on a lot of models of compressor, especially older ones, but a lot of compressors only give you a whole number, and it's typically like 2, 3, 8, 16. It goes up. Sometimes they even go to like an infinite symbol. The threshold is how loud the signal has to be before compression is applied. So say you set your threshold, so when you are setting a threshold, you want to set it below wherever your maximum signal is in your track. And when we do this in the Pro Tools session, you'll see what I mean. But that also makes sense, right? So wherever you want to make your signal quieter in the loudest parts, so you set it below the peaks of your signal, and it'll start to apply. So you have the attack next. This is something that you get a hang of the more you work with different instruments and the more that you start mixing. This is how quickly the compressor starts to apply. This is usually measured in milliseconds. Some compressors have a faster attack than others. Release, how soon the compression stops once the signal drops below the threshold. Knee, how smooth the compression is applied, compression over time. And makeup gain, boosts the compressed signal. So those are the typical controls that you'll see on a compressor. So let's get into compressor types. There are 4 we're going to look at. The first is variable mu. This is sometimes known as tube compressor because that's the main working principle of the compressor. This has the qualities of it are smooth compression. This has no traditional ratio control. It's essentially, it's essentially a wide soft knee that becomes stronger as the signal is pushed harder. Slow attack and slow release time. Avoid this for aggressive peak limiting, and it adds color to the master. Usually, variable mu compressors are used on a master bus channel. Optical compressors. Optical compressors are less sensitive to transients, so much higher ratios can be used with peaks and spikes. Usually impose their own character on the signal, popular with vocals, drums, and basses. Next we have an FET compressor. Super fast attack release, which allows you to shape the transients. Most instruments sound good through this. This is also a really good thing to use if you're trying to control the transients of anything in your drums, because that has some of the most aggressive transients out of any instrument. And last, the VCA compressor. Fully controllable circuits allowing you to fine-tune each setting. Perhaps the fastest attack release times of all compressors. Really transparent. Okay, so we've gone through some compression controls. We've gone through the 4 types of compressors. Let's look at some compressors in action. So I've got this session that we started with last week. And just to play you a little bit of what we're looking at, this is a regular pop tune that I tracked. And I already had mixed this before, but right now we're looking at the unmixed session.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day.
So you can tell already that the vocals have a really wide dynamic range. When we get to the chorus of it, she's pushing a lot, and we don't want to have it stick out so much, which is what our compressor is going to be used for. It's going to smooth this transition between when she is going to her loudest part from this quieter pre-chorus. And so I'm going to put all 4 compressors onto our vocal, and we're going to see how that affects the sound. So I've got these 2 vocal tracks. They were mic'd with 2 different mics, and we've mixed them together. This is bused to our Vox bus. And so everything that comes through on these channels with the signal is going to be routed to this Vox bus channel. And so I'm going to put the inserts on here. That way we can hear the total signal being compressed. So we are going to be compressing our EQ that we applied from last time and our small amount of reverb that's been applied to this channel. So let's start with our variable mu compressor. I'm going to use the H-comp compressor. This is a Waves compressor, and it is supposed to model some of the older variable mu models. You can see it has a lot of our regular controls that we would expect to see on a compressor. We have our threshold, ratio, and attack, and release. It also has some other controls as well. It's got a dry wet knob, it's got analog, it's got punch, and it's got output. It also has some of these other types of dials for us to see, and limiter as well. You can also sync this to the BPM of your track or a host track. We're not going to get into everything with this right now. We're just trying to listen to how much compression is applied over time. So typically for vocals, I like to shoot anywhere between 2 and 4 to 1 as our ratio. So this, when you move it, has a little dial on it. You can get in pretty minute because it goes to the decimal place. We're gonna go just to 3 though for now. So trying to get it down to 3. All right, so we're at 3. For vocals, you usually want a mid to fast attack and release time. But we'll go through and we can adjust these as we're listening to it. So for right now, I just want to play the track so I can adjust the threshold. And actually, I'm going to show you a different compressor first. So, because I think that the threshold is going to make a lot more sense than this view. So I'm going to bypass this compressor and I'm going to open one that I like to use a lot, this R compressor, because it will show you the actual signal coming in, which allows you to adjust the threshold here. This is a pretty simple looking compressor too, so it has a lot of the things that we talked about. It has threshold, it has ratio, it has attack, release, and makeup gain. It also has these nice buttons that allow you to change between electro and opto, for example, warm and smooth compression. And what's interesting is that this not only has downwards compression or traditional compression, but it also has upwards compression. So same thing, we're going to take this ratio to about 3. And as we play the track, so right now, because the threshold is all the way at the top, there's no compression being applied. But as we bring the threshold below our peaks of our signal, we'll start to hear it happen.
And it's not always easy.
So right here is about where we want to start applying our threshold.
But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind.
So you can see as it's playing how much dB reduction it's applying. And it's only applying this when it goes past our threshold. Just so you guys can hear, I'm going to bypass during it too, so that we can hear exactly the difference. Because it's a very subtle difference unless you are listening in.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same.
You hear how much dB reduction has been applied? It's a lot more smooth now when she goes into that upper dynamic limit. So I'm going to kind of adjust the attack and release too as we listen to this.
And it's not always easy,
so this way is going faster.
you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same.
This is going slower.
Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
You can see how it changes the attenuation down here as well.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain.
See how slowly now it comes back now that release is very, very large. Now it should go really quick. See? So this is our I really like this compressor because it's quick. It's very visually appealing to me. And it's just got the basic controls that I need. So let's go back to our H compressor now. So we want to do the same thing. We want to adjust this threshold. We don't want to be too aggressive with it or else it's going to not be natural. Make a little quicker attack. And a little slower release. Maybe a little slower attack, actually.
is where
I don't want this to jump too much.
if you love me till the world fades away.
This punch knob right here actually has to do with the transients as well, which we might not hear so well on the vocals, but when we apply this compressor to our drums, you may hear it a little better.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be.
I think you can actually really hear this with the breaths.
And it's not always easy, you know. And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same.
Just a bypass so we can hear the difference.
Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you.
So you can hear, not only is it applying quite a bit of dB difference, but it's also imposing its own color onto the sound of our track.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day, baby.
It's also really compressing our reverb as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that on bypass, and we're going to go on to our FET compressor now. We're going to use this. This is a built-in FET model compressor with Pro Tools, BF76. It's really simple. It just has input, output, attack, release, ratio, and meter. So the meter just kind of changes your meter here. And for ratio, you can see that we don't really have a lot of options. We only have 4. We have a 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 12-to-1, and 20-to-1. So this is for aggressive limiting.
And it's not always easy.
So let's turn our input all the way down. And we want to see
But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy,
we want to adjust it just so we start to see the needle move.
and it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you.
Maybe a little bit more medium attack.
Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change. We have come so far,
All right, so I'm gonna play it again with the bypass.
and it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change.
So just in terms of pure tone and sound quality, I think this one works really well for our vocals right now. It's pretty transparent compared to our variable mute compressor.
And it's not always easy.
Sounds really natural.
You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
So let's see what happens when we play with these ratios as well.
And it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
So let's give it some more signal too, so we really see what's happening.
And it's not always always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you
So
start
what we're hearing is it's got so much signal going into it and it's compressing it so much that it's taking away a lot of the natural sound of it, and it sounds a little louder too because this input level is pushing into our output too.
and it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
Okay, let's bring the input down a little bit.
And it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same.
All right. So that's how that one sounds. I think it sounds actually pretty good when you have it, at a reasonable thing like how we started before with the 4 ratio low input. So let's bypass this one and we'll move on to our next one, which is our VCA. So for our VCA compressor, I'm going to use the DBX 160. This is a pretty industry standard Waves plugin for modeling our VCA. It's got a lot of other knobs on it too that we can adjust and play with. It is modeling the amount of noise that you would normally hear from the true outboard gear that it's based on.
And it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change. We have come so far, right here in your arms is where I wanna stay. If you love me, tell the world, babe.
Man, I haven't really done much of anything, and I just love this sound. It sounds really, really good already.
And it's not always easy.
Compared to the bypass,
You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you
we can even bring this up too a little.
I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change.
Really, really nice. Really transparent sound like you would expect from our VCA compressor. Doesn't add its own color to it much at all, unless we turn up our noise a lot. What's interesting about this one is that for the first time we have this infinite symbol on our compression. So let's turn it all the way up to infinite, see how it goes.
And it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me,
You can hear it very subtly that when the compressor finally starts to work, it just clamps down on this signal, making it pretty unnatural now.
and it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could
So there you go. I would never go to infinite compression on vocals, but for other instruments, there might be times where this, as an effect, can be what you want out of your sound. So let's bypass this, and we will go to our last compressor. We're going to look at the optical compressor, and for the plugin we're going to use this V-Comp compressor. So this also has a lot of different knobs on it, but we are trying to look for the ones that we are basic controls that are on almost every compressor. We have input, output, we have ratio, release, a de-esser, which is a type of compression as well. And this one's interesting because it has a compressor and it's got a limiter. So we're going to keep the compressor side on. And let's see. And it also has this interesting analog control too. Let's just keep it at 50% to see how it goes. And this has a really interesting auto release feature. And sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. You have to always be listening as listen with your ears, not with your eyes. And yeah. So what is our ratio? Our ratio right now is 4-1. Let's turn it down to 2-1 for now and see how that sounds.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind, I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one.
See what happens when we turn on the de-esser. So this is a pretty interesting sound. It definitely imposes a lot of character onto our signal. So I'll play it again and we'll do our bypass on and off trick and we'll see how it goes.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind, I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change.
Pretty interesting. I really like this sound. I don't like it on this particular track as much as our VCA compressor, this DBX160, but it definitely can have a lot of uses. It has its own character and color to it, which is really nice, kind of mimicking an older style. So, all right, so that is our voice. We're going to bypass this one and keep on our DBX160, and we're going to move on to drums now. So same thing, I want to look at our bass next. Let's talk about the bass a bit because it's kind of an interesting instrument which has like a very wide range of sounds that it can produce. So let's actually just kind of listen to our bass tracks right now. Whoops. So you can see there's quite a bit of dynamic range in this. Right now we're hovering around 25, 30 to 25. But once we get into the chorus, you're going to see this jump up right here. See, and that's a lot of variability. We want to, maybe not in every song, but at least for my taste in this song, I want to make this dynamic range a lot smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out our different compressors and see what kind of things we can do. So we're going to start with our H compressor. I'm going to wait until, see, now we're getting cool. And I want faster attack on this, slow, mid to slow release, because I want this compressor to keep working throughout that because the notes are pretty long. And let's be a little more aggressive with our ratio. Bring it up to 4.5. I actually might bring in our ratio even more because I want to kind of squash this sound. Maybe a faster attack too. Excellent. So now let's hear this in context. And I'm going to bring up my output knob so that it is mixed well with the rest of the track.
It's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never
So you can just hear that huge jump. Maybe I can bring this down a little bit too.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a
It's always a balancing act between many different
Since you
factors.
started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gone.
Cool, so let's bypass this too.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you
So you can already hear when we bypass this, it immediately brings down our level, even when the needle's not being pushed that much.
And it's not always easy, you know.
It's really startling.
be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you.
Very cool. That's a pretty nice sound for this actually. This is our variable mu compressor. So we're going to bypass this. And we're going to look at our FET compressor now, the BF76.
And it's not always easy, you know.
Probably
you
want
can
our
be
bigger
a
ratio like we did last time.
But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
You can already tell this is so much more smooth than our variable mu because this, you see how this doesn't have a knee control? It's that gets affected by the ratio and how much input you put into it.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain.
I just realized that we actually haven't seen one with a knee control. Why don't I show you a compressor that has a knee so you guys understand? Here we go. This one has a knee. So it's a little hard to see because it's so small. Maybe I can... No, I can't make this any bigger. But you can see this angle right here becomes a lot more smooth as we bring this up. That's what knee does. It's how fast this compression is going to be applied. Let's move on to our VCA compressor now. The DBX 160.
And it's not always easy.
Let's actually go
you know you can
to
be
5.
a pain.
Bring our threshold down.
But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you
Output
blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day. Baby, you're the one that ain't ever gonna change. We have come so far, right here in your arms is where
This is a pretty interesting compressor because it doesn't have a attack release, does it?
we tell the world face. since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind.
I just really like the sound of this compressor. Must be why so many people use it. It's interesting though. There's not a lot to do with this. There's this area down here, but that's kind of more for the analog quality of the compressor rather than the actual compression taking place. It's a really interesting compressor.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life.
Awesome. All right. And we'll move on to our last compressor now, which is our optical compressor. We're going to use the V-comp compressor. Whoops.
And it's not always easy, you
Some more
know
input.
you can be a pain.
Yeah, let's go to 6 to 1 actually. And let's do a little bit of analog, a little bit of output. Maybe not that much actually. Let's continue.
It's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same.
Man, do you remember how big of a difference we had between our pre-chorus and our chorus with this bass part? This just completely brought down our dynamic range so much. Let's bypass it so we can remember the difference between those two. I'll bring this up a little too so we can really hear it.
You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day.
Okay, and bring it back down and listen to it now.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend.
Man, I love that. I love that. See, this is I wasn't a huge fan of this compressor on our vocals because of the character that it added to it, but I think it sounds really nice on this bass. Very cool. I'm going to leave that as it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit right now. I'm going to shift to a different type of compression style called sidechain compression right now, because we're talking about our bass and we're going to be moving on to our drums. So what we can do is we can take this compressor, and instead of having the input controlled by the signal here, we can have the input controlled by any track, really. But this is a technique that's most commonly used for sidechaining to the kick drum. This is because the bass and the kick drum occupy a pretty similar frequency range, the lowest frequency in our frequency spectrum typically for a song. And what happens is they kind of compete with each other, and you don't really hear the kick drum as much as you would like to. And this is, a pretty big problem for a lot of dance music. It's not so bad in something like this, but I digress. So right now, let's listen and hear just how it is now, how much we can hear at kick drum.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain.
Pretty much non-existent, right? So just so you guys can hear what the drum part sounds like, let's solo it all out. And actually, this could come up a bit. Cool, I like that. So what we can do is we can take the signal from our kick drum, and when it enters, then the compression applies to our bass. So every time the kick drum hits, the bass is going to come down. So I'm actually going to use another compressor for this. I'm going to just go back to our simple R compressor. And we're going to bring this down a lot and bring the ratio down a lot. So hopefully we can hear this. Fast attack, fast release. And we're going to come to this key input right here. And just so I know, I guess it's going to be +1 and 2. Maybe I can, oh, you know what I can do is I can take this signal, send it to, I don't know, let's just set it to 15. And send the other one there too. Cool. And so now we can take the input from 15. And so this compressor should work on, remember, this compressor is on our bass channel right now. And we should see it working when, see? So that's going to make our bass drop down in volume, right? It's going to compress the bass sound so that the kick drum can come through. So let's unsolo this.
And it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain. But since you
So we can hear it a little bit.
started loving me,
This kick drum definitely needs some work so that we can hear it better anyway, but we can kind of hear it working.
and it's not always easy, you know you can be a pain.
Maybe we just brought,
But since
yeah.
you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blew
Cool. So that is sidechain compression in a nutshell. We just take our key input from another signal and apply it to the one that we want. And this can be used in a lot of different ways. But this is our most common use of it. Don't be afraid to stack up compressors like this sometimes. You can also apply compression to say, right now we have the bass DI signal and some bass amp signal coming into our bass bus. And say you just wanted to compress the DI signal or the amp signal, you can put that on here and have a compressor for the total signal as well. Just always use your ears. Okay, so let's, I think I actually had, I was going to use it with the bass. So let's do that. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys parallel compression as well. Parallel compression is a technique that's used to mimic the effects of upward compression, right? And we can actually look at upward compression right now because one of my compressors does this. So let's bypass this.
and it's not
And actually, I'm going to solo out the bass right now. So right now, this is our sidechain. Let's just we'll bypass that. We'll bring in our own right here. So take our threshold down to here. And so, okay, so this is actually a little different than upward compression because it's going to, instead of taking our signal that is below our threshold, making it louder, it's going to take everything that's above our threshold and make it louder if we move the ratio the other way. So everything's fine right now, but we should get quite a bit of dynamic range coming up. And you could actually take this and put it way down here so that everything gets boosted too. Pretty interesting. So this is not the technique that I'm looking for right now, though, with parallel compression. Um, but anyway, so parallel compression is trying to mimic upwards compression, which is taking our signal below the threshold and boosting that while keeping the signal that is above our threshold intact. So how we do this is we split our signal into two paths, one being a through path, no processing on it whatsoever, and the other being compressed with a really aggressive ratio. This way, everything that's above our really compressed signal that's above our threshold is going to be heavily compressed, right? But it's going to do nothing to our signal below the threshold. So when we have two paths, two of the same signal layered on top of each other, we're going to hear it louder. When you put two of the exact same signal on top of each other without any processing, that results in an increase of 3 dB. It's like if you and your friend could sing at the exact same level, say, in the exact same note, then when you started singing, say that you are singing at, I don't know, 40 dB. If your friend also sang the exact same thing that you're singing at 40 dB, the listener is going to hear that combination at 43 dB. So that increase is going to affect everything below our threshold when we combine these signals together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our bass, wherever it is. Let's just do this with the DI. And I'm going to add a new track. I'm going to copy this. Go add that. So I'm going to take this out of groups first. Let's copy right on down. Did I mess up? Oh. Just want to make sure that they are aligned. It looks like I was a little off, so I'm going to try that again. There we go. So now we have two of these signals, right? And if we just played it as is, you wouldn't hear anything different, except that it's a minus 3 dB difference. Right? So now what we do is we can take so this is we'll call this our clean signal, and this will be our processed. And we can run this into the bass bus as well. Okay. So now we're going to attach let's use a limiter. Whoa. Okay, never mind. I don't want to use this. Let's just go back to our regular arc compressor. So we want to have this quieter stuff below our threshold so that it doesn't get impacted. Cool. So right there, aggressively limit this. Cool. So now we're hearing both of them. Oh, that's why it was okay. I was wondering why we weren't hearing that much of a difference. So now we should, because now we're just soloing out this compressor. Cool. So now we can put them both together. And so now it's a pretty subtle difference right now, right? But you can hear that there is, if I unsolo this clean signal, that we have a slight drop. So we've effectively taken everything below our threshold and made it louder, and aggressively limited everything above our threshold, so that we're going to be hearing mostly one of those of our clean channel coming through, right? And it's not going to stack with the parallel channel. It's a really interesting technique. It's kind of approaching compression from the other way around. Okay, so that's it with our bass right now. Let's look at our drums. I want to specifically look at our snare drum right now. I've got two. I've got a snare under and a snare over that is mic'd. And I'm going to first look at our H comp compressor, which is our variable mu compressor. Actually, I'm going to do this on our drum bus so that I don't have to put it on both of our snare channels. So we want a fast attack time, because a snare and pretty much any drum sound is really, really quick. It's got most of its energy, most of its brightness right at the outset of when you hit it, or the beginning of the signal. Let me just show you. So snare. Okay, you see these snares? See these waveforms? They have a lot of energy right at the beginning, right? And then quickly dissipate. This is known as the transient, okay? Like this. And when we have really aggressive transients like this, we need to have a really fast compressor so that we can capture this. So we bring it fast. We're getting a little bit of bleed from the other drum instruments, just so you know. Let's bring the ratio up a little. This is not necessarily the compressor that I would want to use on this. You don't really hear a lot. Like, you hear some of it happening, but the variable mu compressor is not a very fast compressor compared to especially our FET and BZA compressors. So let's move on to, actually, this is probably a really good time to talk about gating. So gating is another type of compressor C1 gate is fine for this. So it's not doing anything right now, but what we do is so what it does is everything that falls below a certain threshold in dB, it just will turn the signal off completely so you don't hear that. So so when we bypass this, right, you can hear a lot of those other instruments because there's bleed happening in a drum set a lot of the time. And so if we want to just isolate those snare drum hits, then we can put a gate on it. And we're still we're hearing a lot of the this is mic'd on top and on bottom. And the mic that's on the bottom snare, that's miking the bottom of the snare, is right next to those snares. So when the bass drum, when it kicks, it has some resonant frequencies with the bottom head of the snare drum, and so you're going to hear some of the snare in there as well. But when you mix it in with the rest of the instruments, you're not going to hear it so much because you're just going to hear your bass drum taking over. But this is really going to help us out. There's some other controls here too, like hold. This is kind of like a release time in a way. It's like how long is it going to hold that signal? I want it to be really, really aggressive because I just want to hear our snare. Actually, I can bring this up even a little more. Excellent. So now we can go on to our FET compressor. The gate is also pretty useful for a lot of other applications for drums as well. You can put it on your bass drum. You can use it for a lot of, like sibilants and vocals. You can do a kind of similar parallel compression thing that you wouldn't just take this and throw it on your master bus for the vocals, because then it might make it sound super unnatural. But if you had a split path, then you could use the gate at a sibilant frequency so that it takes away a lot of the S's and T's that are at a lower dB than the actual talking voice. Okay, so let's move on to our FET compressor, which is this one. Fast attack, fast release. I want to adjust the gate a little bit more so that maybe we can get only the snare. Nice. What's interesting is that we can get a lot more of the body when we have the compressor on with this one. And because it's so fast, it allows us to grab those transients right away. So this is bypassed. Really dry, not a lot to the sound. But now we have a little more body to our sound, which is pretty nice. All right, so that's our FET compressor. Oops, want to just bypass it. Let's move on to our VCA. I think this one will sound really good because it's super quick. What's interesting though is that I can't control how quick it is, so we will see how much it does. So I'm gonna bring the threshold down, and let's give it a roll. Let's bypass it. What if we compress it a little more? I'm a little surprised actually. I didn't think that this one worked as well as our other BF76 one did. Let's listen to this again. All right, let's bypass it. All right, let's move on to our bass drum now. So we have this all on our drum bus, which actually makes this a little easier. So we're going to, instead of soloing our snare drum, we're going to solo our kick drum. Again, if you guys have any questions or have anything to add or anything at all to contribute in chat, feel free to use our chat. So let's listen to our bass drum right now bypassed. Ooh, what I want to do is turn off this gate though, or else we're never going to hear it. We actually could adjust this gate a little bit. Maybe a little bit of hold. Cool. Alright, so this is without any compression. This is with some compression. Without. With. You can hear that we have a lot more boomy sound with this. Let's bring up the punch a little bit more and see what happens. I really like that. Remember, this is our variable mu modeled compressor right now, which is supposed to have like pretty slow attack and release times. And it also, actually, let's bring down the release a little bit. And it's also supposed to give a lot of color to our track. And this sounds pretty good, actually. I'm interested with how this sounds on this particular track. It gives it a lot more body than without, right? Cool. Let's see how our FET compressor does. So this is without. And this is with. Let's start the ratio. Get a little more input. It's working a little bit. This is supposed, this, as FET compressors are, they're really transparent, so it's not going to add much color to our sound at all. So this is a pretty subtle difference. All right, and let's hear our VCA compressor, this DBX 160. That has a very interesting sound to it. This is bypassed. This is with. I'm a little surprised that this DBX compressor does not sound all that great on our drums when it sounded so good on our vocals and our bass. But that's how it goes sometimes. So we actually didn't get to listen to our optical compressor either, the V comp compressor. So let's do that now. I want 4 to 1 is fine. Release should be really fast. Maybe. Okay, and here's without. Here's with. It doesn't really add much to it. It does give it a little bit of color. It's not bad. I don't dislike it. I think I liked our variable mu though the most for our kick drum in particular. Okay, so we have one other instrument I want to look at, which is our piano. So gonna unsolo this, gonna solo our piano. So this is with nothing on it right now. I just want to look at our levels real quick to see what we're working with. There's not much dynamic distance with our piano. So really, there should only be very minimal compression that gets applied to this. So let's start with our variable mu compressor again, the H comp. Okay, yeah, pretty minimal. So this is without. This is with. I really like that. See, we're not really compressing all that much. You can tell by the needle, our ratio is only at 2. Wait. Okay, so we're about at 3. Actually, I want to bring this down to more around 2 and see how that is. Bypass it. You can tell before we use this compressor that the sound is a lot thinner, and that is, I think, a big characteristic of this compressor is that the color it gives it is a lot more warm. I really like this on the piano actually. And like I said, you don't really need much compression. It needs just a little subtlety goes a long way. All right, and let's look at our FET compressor next, which again is our BF76. Let's give it a long release, medium attack. All right, it's as low as we can for the ratio. Bring down our output a little bit too. I want to try and match these. Seems pretty close with the actual loudness level we're getting. So this is without the compressor. And here's with. I think I need to bring this up just a little bit more. Nice. It's a little too transparent for me, honestly. I don't really think it's doing that much to our sound for this piano. So I'm going to move on to our VCA, which is a DBX 160. Let's see. I'm interested in this. Let's see how it goes. I want a low compression. Bring down our threshold. Yeah. Let's hear it without again. And here's with. Let's see what happens when we increase some noise into it. It's got that nice older compressor. I really like that. I don't want that to jump too much. Just seems like this is giving it so much character, which is really interesting for a VCA. Maybe it's the noise, but I think it's really interesting. I like this compressor a lot. It's pretty transparent in its sound too, which is what you would expect from the VCA. Very cool. All right. And lastly, our optical compressor. And we are using the V-comp compressor for that. Keep it at auto, that's okay. This is a little more bright, actually. A little more clear. Okay. So I'm gonna actually bypass all of the things we did on the jumps because we didn't affect the actual individual drums. We just did some of the. What did we like on the Yeah. We just did the whole drums and then soloed out the ones we wanted instead of doing the individual ones. But let's hear how this goes. With there must be something soloed. Yeah.
And it's not always easy. You know you can be a pain. But since you started loving me, I've never been the same. Boy, you blow my mind. I could spend my life with you every day, baby.
So they're very subtle changes, which is what the compressor does. But a lot of subtle changes built up together makes it sound really nice. Don't feel afraid to put some compressors on top of each other if you're going for a certain sound. And always, we listen to all these just soloed out so we could really hear what's happening. But when you're mixing, you should always go back and forth between soloed and in context. So, just to recap, compression is all about dynamics. It's about making making your dynamic range smaller and more manageable. You can use it for a lot of different things. We talked about sidechain compression. We talked about parallel compression. We talked about gating. We talked about the different types of compression. We talked about compression controls. So I would implore you to go and take this a step further. Look at some more different videos on YouTube even, and listen to what others have to say, what other uses they have. A lot of people like to put compression on their master. If you do this though, make it really subtle, and you should start your mixing process with compression on your master and not end it with it. But you can put it on your buses, you can put it on your individual tracks. And the more that you use compressors and the more you explore different styles, the better you're going to get at what you're trying to do. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.